Disclaimer, Grayscale is owned by DCG, which means they have the same parent company as CoinDesk, but that doesn't mean I can't tell you about some bad news about them now, does it? Anyway, so Grayscale has this financial vehicle called GBTC, and what it's supposed to do is give investors price exposure to Bitcoin. It was, and it is very critically not an ETF, right? That's an important distinction. It holds actual Bitcoin in a trust on behalf of investors for a fee. In the early days when there weren't any products like it, GBTC traded at a premium to the price of Bitcoin, which means you had to pay more than the Bitcoin is worth so you could have in this product that's sort of kind of traded like a stock. Fast forward to now, and we have a bunch of other types of Bitcoin ETFs in places like Canada and Europe, and we have this futures-based ETF in the US. But what we don't have yet is a spot Bitcoin ETF. In plain English, we do have this Bitcoin ETF in the United States that requires fancy financial contracts, futures, to mimic the price of Bitcoin instead of them just holding the Bitcoin in spot to mimic the price of Bitcoin. Seems silly, right? So Grayscale is like, hey, SEC, we have this trust thing called GBTC. It holds Bitcoin. It's kind of like an ETF, but it isn't actually an ETF. So can we just convert it into an ETF and make it easy for people to get exposure to Bitcoin? And the SEC was like, no, which is why we're here. And then the CEO of Grayscale announced that Grayscale is suing the SEC after hiring some high-powered lawyer. And guys, I could talk about details for hours here, but I want to let Zach riff.
Okay, I'll riff. Yeah, the quest for the spot Bitcoin ETF continues apace in the US. And the US, it should be said, is really one of the only major markets that doesn't have a spot Bitcoin ETF. So Grayscale, which is a big player in the space, and GBTC, which has become critical actually to the recent developments in the marketplace, and we can get into that later. That is a product that they've long been committed to transferring to an ETF, a true spot Bitcoin ETF. But that is not going to happen anytime soon. And you're right, now they're mounting this legal campaign to see if the SEC can reconsider or at least articulate in full why it is a spot Bitcoin ETF remains so hated by US regulators. So it's going to be interesting to see what comes of this and what ultimately will transpire in the legal proceedings. It still seems to be early innings of the legal proceedings. I don't know if it's actually filed yet to sue. They have filed a petition. So there is movement on that front, but Grayscale is indeed framing it as, okay, we're going to sue the government and have them argue in court why this continues to be a sticking point for securities regulators in the US. It's going to be weird to see how this all shakes out, whether there is a protracted fight, but there's been a lot of noise around GBTC given some of the recent activities in the market and some exposure to some of these now insolvent players who had large GBTC positions that have sort of seemingly led to further risk-taking that played out very poorly for them. So it's going to be interesting to see how Grayscale pursues this given this market condition and whether or not they can ultimately get that product, that spot Bitcoin ETF, over the finish line in the US. Jen, you're in Canada. They got those things up there. What are your thoughts on this?
We've had them for a while. I mean, I say this every time we talk about spot ETFs. I'm so done talking about this. We didn't get the ETF in the bull market. Did we really think it was going to happen now? Like, Bitcoin is down 60% for the year. Exchanges are liquidating. Hedge funds are liquidating. People are going insolvent. I just don't think this is the right time, especially in the eyes of the SEC, for this to happen. I think regulators are watching what's happening in the market. They are collecting up all of the information. I think we're going to come out of this bear cycle with some heavy-handed regulation that speaks to exactly what's happening. And I would have been very surprised to see this spot ETF go through. That said, I think that the lawyer that Grayscale has brought in does have a good point. Futures ETFs exist. So all of the issues that the SEC is citing in regards to why the spot ETF can't exist don't actually make sense because they've approved the futures ETF that addresses all of those issues. So I see what they're saying. It will be interesting to see how this plays out. So many other countries, just like Canada, have spot ETFs. And so savvy Americans can also gain access and exposure to Bitcoin. Just hold Bitcoin if you want. But George,
you sound like me. You sound a lot like me. I saw Sundali's hand go up. I want her to go first before I just get angry again.
Oh, thank you. You should get angry. No, I think, this is about oversight and control, right? And the SEC doesn't have enough of either of those things to be satisfactory enough for it. And I don't know, this wasn't going to be a surprising decision, whether Grayscale was planning to sue over rejection or not. I think given the recent market mayhem, it might still take a while, as Zach said. To be honest, the SEC stance on this has been pretty consistent, and their argument is like CME futures market, for instance, that has, Bitcoin futures ETFs is regulated by the CFTC, the Commodity Futures Trading Commission. And it's clear that the SEC is kind of waiting for someone it has sufficient authority over to come into the picture and, to be able to approve a spot ETF. I think that this is justified. And it'll take a while, but it has a point. And if it wants to be careful, the SEC hasn't been so consistent with their stuff so far. So this is an area where I'm like, okay, you know what? They're sticking to their guns. See this through. Good for you. I'm sorry, I'm playing the devil's advocate. But
somebody's on the side of the SEC. Who would we?
So George can get angry now. Go ahead.
Well, one thing you said, Jen, was, okay, we didn't get it in a bear market or bull market. What makes you think we'll get it in a bear market? In my head, it might be easier, honestly, to approve it in a bear market, because imagine if they did approve the spot ETF when Bitcoin is $60,000 and then, whatever, right now we're at 20K and all of these retail investors just got completely screwed. That would look really bad for people who are kind of pushing for the spot ETF. So maybe there's something to be said there. But the other thing you said about what the lawyer said, if we have a futures ETF, why can't we have a spot ETF, is completely spot on, right? The things they pointed to in the ruling were, we don't know what the price is going to do because, there's market manipulation. We have Tether FUD. There's going to be a hack on the Bitcoin network. There's a big whale out there that's going to tank the entire thing in just one trade. Okay, great. Then why is there a futures-based ETF, right? This is just some fancy financial contract that the CME people can, make money off of. So what, we're going to just allow there to be a futures? It makes no sense. If the futures ETF is supposed to mimic the price of Bitcoin, great. All of these things that affect the price of Bitcoin are going to affect the price of the thing that mimics the price. Like, come on, guys, this doesn't make any sense. So while they were, consistent with the not approving the spot ETFs, there's an inconsistency in, okay, we're mimicking price. If this affects price, all these risks affect price, then why even have a futures ETF? Just no ETFs. Everyone hold your own Bitcoin. Anyway.
I have to say, George, I love your impression of the SEC citing their issues.
Oh.
Yeah.
It was good.
Tether FUD.